A secret conference took place in 1905. They agreed upon certain terms. Secret terms that will always leave the West in control. This video is to help you understand the picture as a whole to some extent. Why is our life so influenced by the West? Language, trade, class, all of it. But to understand how we arrived at this point, we need to go back in time. So let me show you how the West controls the world. The world we live in today is drawn on paper by European travelers, men who were curious and adventurous. But over time, their motives turned into greed, and they tried to maintain as much power as possible. This created one of the most influential events in history. It's the reason why a map that was supposed to look like this became like this. A 500-year project, transferring language, weapons, diseases, violence, and human beings to every place on Earth. On their way, they took things that made them richer: minerals, rubber, tea, sugar, and human beings. I understood that Europe was full of poor and miserable farmers. But they took over the world. They shaped it and imposed control over it. To understand how Europe dominated the world, we will go back on maps. At the beginning of the 15th century, the map looked like this. Europe was a group of small kingdoms. There was no abundance of anything. In the Middle Ages, most of them were farmers, and they were in debt to some rich landlords. On the other hand, other empires were thriving, like the Ottoman Empire, and they had silk. And an empire in India, they were famous for spices and cotton. And the Chinese had already invented gunpowder, porcelain, and advanced ships. And they all traded with each other, getting richer together. Everything was better than Europe. Of course, the Europeans wanted to join in on the trade.
The first two to get involved in trading and set out to explore were Spain and Portugal. So they started heading towards the east, but the Ottomans stopped them. They were stronger, richer, and Muslims. At that time, Portugal and Spain were Catholic, and dealing with Muslims and Jews was not the best. So Portugal went around the continent of Africa. On the way, they traded with rich African empires on the coasts. And this actually worked. They started sending many ships. Suddenly, they were wearing luxurious clothes. They used spices that made their food better. They didn't even have pepper. The age of exploration began. Exploration only, no lands. Until now. Spain sees Portugal training, so they wanted to find their own way to Asia. There was an Italian guy named Columbus. He came up with an idea to head west instead of east, because they thought the world looked like this. If you walk in the opposite direction, you will reach Asia. Do it, Columbus, they said. But they found that the world is not like that. Columbus reached 2 continents. When he arrived, he thought it was India, and he found people. He said, of course, these are the Indians. But it turns out that he is in Cuba. Now, you know why they were called Red Indians. Although he was wrong, he found more than what he was looking for. He found great empires, rich culture, food, and minerals that were not available in his country. He told them, let's trade. But when he found them without armies to protect their lands and resources, he came up with an idea that changed the course of history. He said, instead of trading, we will take the land. Spain and Portugal wanted global trade and exploration, but soon they realized that instead of trading, they could take the land themselves. The old world versus the new world. It became normal to go and take the land because there was no resistance, and the race started. Spain and Portugal drew 2 lines without speaking to the inhabitants of the earth. Anywhere on the right is Portugal, and to the left is Spain. That's why Brazilians speak Portuguese. They began to spread very quickly, spreading Spanish and Portuguese everywhere, harvesting silver, tobacco, and sugar on their way, and they killed people. Not only with their weapons, but with the diseases that they brought with them. The story of Spain and Portugal began to spread, and other European countries started noticing and realized that was a good way to enrich your country. Now you understand what imperialism means. It's the 17th century. The Netherlands, England, and France joined the race. They headed to the west, they found a lot of land and people living there, and they started taking these lands, claiming that the people who live there do not know how to use the resources they have. They began to strip them of their humanity. They took advantage of Christianity, preached them to save them. Now it's the late 17th century and Europeans are everywhere. The trading developed very fast, and they established the first company in history. The competition between them helped the growth, the settlement of more lands and greater trade. Europe turned into a different world than the one you saw in the beginning. tea, coffee, tobacco, sugar, chocolate, and clothing. Suddenly, there was abundance. And with abundance comes time. Time for science, development, art, and improving life. It became a competition, how to take the largest amount of wealth from the places they settled in order to satisfy the demand in their homeland. Began trading slaves, transporting them from Africa to their settlements, and they forced them to work. At the same time, Europeans began to think about human rights and democracy. These empires are what our thinking is built on. It determines who has the power, who deserves leadership and resources, and who has the right to exploit them. Since then, the Europeans have dominated the scientific and cultural revolutions and controlled the power. Do you feel the connection between then and now? Now it's the early 1900s. The powers of the world were determined. Before World War I, Britain held a secret conference with the colonial powers in London, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, and Italy. It's called the Campbell Secret Conference. They developed plans and directions that preserved the West's position and its sovereignty over the world forever. But what's strange is that the terms of the document are directed to the Middle East and the Arabs in particular. That meeting had people experienced in spreading temptations and diseases throughout history. Philosophers, historians, scientists, and experts participated in that meeting. Prime Minister Henry Campbell, after whom the conference was named, said at the beginning of the conference, empires form and expand, and with time they become stronger. Then they stabilize to some extent. Then they dissolve and weaken little by little. Then they disappear, collapse, and fall. And history is full of such examples. They began to find ways to protect European colonialism from collapse. They concluded that the Mediterranean Sea is the vital artery of colonialism because it connects East and West. But the problem is that there are people living on its shores, sharing culture, language, history, and religion. These are the Arabs. Especially that they were powerful civilizations. In order to ensure survival, they must not allow other forces to unite. So what is the solution? We create a foreign body between them to destabilize and prevent their union. And we need a location that is close to the World Trade Corridor, Suez Canal. So they used the Zionist movement as a reason to implement their plan, Israel in Palestine. It does not exist for religious reasons or Zionism. The goal is to ensure the presence of the West, which overthrows the Arab and prevents their union, to ensure that the West remains in control for as long as possible. This is the end of the video. I hope you can see the whole picture now. See you on the next one. Peace.